Okay, before, if you have any question, you can, I guess, unmute yourself and ask directly, or either write it in the chat and I will read it for you. And it's a great opportunity to have here today Filippo Gagliardi, who is the responsible of Poema at the European Commission. And today it will give a talk about postdoctoral fellowship under Horizon Europe. So please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm glad to have received this invitation. The postdoctoral fellowships are a very good opportunity for you to continue as Marie Curie fellows, and they build on the experience of the individual fellowships in the past. So in this sense, they are a continuation of the program, focusing still on the training side of the researchers, this time after the PhD. And the good thing is that in comparison to the past, the program has been simplified and also the budget has been increased. So we have 6.6 billion in our budget, which means basically $1 billion per year to spend. And so far the program has been very successful. That's why it was renewed and it was increased from a budget point of view. Over the past 7 years, Marie Curie supported over 65,000 researchers. So that's quite a big impact. 37% of them come from outside the EU. And 42% were female researchers, and one of the goals is to increase this number, of course. But in general, the program has been considered extremely successful, and so it was included in Horizon Europe, which is the new framework program for research and innovation of the European Union, with, as I said, a higher budget. So the main objectives of the program in comparison to the past remain precisely the same. So training researchers, foster excellence, increase the innovation potential of the EU, focus on international, intersectoral, and interdisciplinary mobility, and basically improve the career perspectives of researchers. And as we were saying just before the beginning of the talk, these are very simple projects from a structural point of view. So they're mono-beneficiaries, meaning that there is one entity that asks for funding and then supports a researcher. And there are two types fundamentally of postdoctoral fellowships, the European and the global. With the European, researchers of any nationality come to the EU. With the global fellowships, it's the other way around. So from member states or associated countries, the researchers based there, so they need to be nationals or long-term residents of these countries, go to a third country to do research outside, basically, in most cases, the boundaries of the European Union. You might know that in the past, when an individual fellowship was a proposal was developed, it was necessary to clarify what kind of project it was. There were different panels depending on the goal of the project. If it was, for example, a career restart, or if it was a project in the non-academic sector. Now all these panels have been removed. So there is only one basically big call through which you can submit any kind of proposal. It's a call that will fund everything at the same time. So the application process is simpler. You just basically need to come up with a good research idea. And of course, have a host institution that will take care of the application and apply for the funds. Another simplification was that the ERA fellowships have been fully integrated in the postdoctoral fellowships. So there used to be calls of ERA fellowships. So for the that was separate from the old individual fellowships. But now with the new program and the postdoctoral fellowships, these ERA fellowships are integrated in the call. So basically, this means that it's just a way of increasing the overall budget of the postdoctoral fellowships call. So there's going to be more money than in the past available for researchers in a simpler way. And another novelty is also that the areas covered by Euratom are included in the eligible sectors. So research in nuclear energy, basically, it's possible as opposed to the past, although it is restricted only to the countries of Euratom. But we're going to see all of this soon in details. So the important thing to know, first of all, is who can receive support. So we're talking about researchers that, in order to be eligible, need to have received their PhD at most 8 years before their recruitment. And they need to fulfill the mobility rule. So this means that they shouldn't have resided or carried out their main activity in the country of the recruiting beneficiary for more than 12 months in the 36 months before the call deadline. So this is checked, of course, when researchers are selected. And these are the two main rules to keep an eye on to know if you are eligible for these postdoctoral fellowships. When it comes to who can apply, however, it's basically any single entity established in the member states of the European Union or the associated countries of Horizon Europe. So pretty much anyone can submit a proposal for a postdoctoral fellowship. The duration of the projects change depending if we're looking at a European postdoctoral fellowship. So for basically research happening in the European Union and researchers coming from everywhere, including third countries, or if we're looking at global postdoctoral fellowships where researchers go abroad outside the European Union, so to third countries. So in the first case, the duration is 12 to 24 months. In the second case, the duration is longer because to the initial 12 to 24 months outgoing phase where the fellow basically goes to the third country in order to carry out his or her research, there is then a 12-month mandatory return phase in Europe. And this makes the global postdoctoral fellowships longer. There is also possibility to further extend the duration of these fellowships, either European or global, it doesn't matter, by including at the end of a project a 6 months or up to 6 months period of placement of the fellow in a non-academic host that needs to be based, however, in the member states of the European Union or associated countries of Horizon Europe. So this is a way basically to increase the exposure to the non-academic sector and provide additional career opportunities. Then during the core duration of the project, there can be secondments and they can be only up to a third of the standard duration of the project. And below you can see that the next call will be on the 13th of April with a higher budget than last year. As I said before, the exposure to the non-academic sector is becoming more and more important. Hence, this extra opportunity for the placement after the end of the core research period. And so, of course, this is something to use if possible, because it increases the duration of the project, it increases its budget, it prolongs the support to the fellow that receives the grant, and it's supposed to increase also the employability and career prospects of the fellow. So you have like a couple of months before the opening of the new call on the 13th of April to consider also these options if you know already more or less how you would like to make use of this funding opportunity. Something to remember here, the definition of non-academic sector, because basically when it comes to the Marie Curie program, we have only a definition of what is academic. So for us, academic is any higher education establishment, whether it is public or private, or any non-profit research organizations, whether they are private or public. and also the international European research organizations, which is a very limited list of organizations. You can find it online. So these are, for us and for the program, the academic organization. Everything else that doesn't clearly follow in this definition is considered non-academic. So as you can see, the possibility for a placement in the non-academic sector is pretty flexible, because there is really a lot of organizations that fall in that profile. So something to remember, as I said before, the secondments and the placements are not the same thing. The secondments take place during the duration of the project, so during the research phase of the project, whereas the non-academic placement is something that is added on top at the end of the project for a period of up to 6 months, which needs to be specified in the proposal. And so the timing changes between these two instruments, whether they happen during the project, like secondments, or at the end, like the placement. Something to remember is also that whereas there is a lot of flexibility for secondments, they can happen anywhere with any organization, the placements in the non-academic sector can only take place in, of course, non-academic organizations that are based in the member states of the European Union or associated countries of Horizon Europe. So there are limitations in terms of geographical coverage of the placements. And when a proposal that involves a placement is submitted, the organization hosting the placement, so the non-academic organization hosting the placement, needs to provide a letter of commitment. Otherwise, this option would be disregarded during the evaluation of the proposals. So there is a little administrative burden on top in this case. And then, okay, so when we look at the budget, so the postdoctoral fellowships work with lump sums, like many other Marie Curie tools. So for every month worked by a fellow, the recruiting organization gets a certain lump sum that is divided into two components, one for the researcher and one for the institution. The part for the researcher includes a living allowance of 5,080 euros, which is basically the salary given to the researcher. Bear in mind two things here. The first one, this is a gross amount that includes all the taxes to be paid by both the fellow and the recruiting organization. So it is not a net salary. And secondly, this gross amount changes from country to country. It is adapted to the cost of living of different countries on the basis of dedicated country correction coefficients that we use to try to reflect the cost of living in different places. So depending on the country where you will go, because of the country correction coefficients and the taxation, the net salary in the end will change quite considerably from country to country. So this living allowance is just a starting point. Then every fellow would receive an additional mobility allowance of 600 euros because the recruitment involves moving abroad to take over the position of postdoctoral fellow in Marie Curie. And then there are three allowances that can be used only if the conditions come up. So the family allowance, if a fellow is married or in a relationship equivalent to marriage, or if he or she has dependent kids. And then there are two new allowances that were introduced with Horizon Europe, so with the new program. One is the long-term leave-up allowance. So this one kicks in if a fellow is forced to leave his or her position for a prolonged period of time, so for more than 30 days in a row. For example, for a maternity leave or a paternity leave or a sick leave. In that case, we will top up the budget in order to cover for the costs of the fellow while the fellow is not working. And this is a new feature of the program in comparison to the past. And then there is a special needs allowance that basically helps to cover the extra cost of recruiting a fellow affected by disabilities, which has also been introduced recently, and it should facilitate the recruitment of fellows with disabilities. And then on top of this, for every month worked by the fellow, the recruiting organization gets 1,650 euros, with which it can cover all its research, training, management, and networking costs related to the implementation of the project. So the allowances have changed in comparison to the past. First of all, the family allowance has been increased from 500 to 660 euros per month. And on top of that, as we've seen, we have these two new long-term and special needs allowances. Something to know is that the special needs allowance is topped up to 60,000 euros per researcher, but in general, this amount of money should be enough to face whatever extra costs are needed for researchers with disabilities during the duration of the project. So when it comes to how postdoctoral fellowship projects are evaluated, the criteria are very similar to the ones applied to other Marie Curie projects. So half of the final scoring depends on the so-called excellence criterion, where basically we look at not only the research activities to be done, but also the quality of the training and supervision. Because at the end of the day, as we've seen in the beginning, Marie Curie supports research activities, of course, but it is the European Union reference program for training of PhD students and postdocs. So clearly, this aspect of the project is taken in very high consideration during the evaluations. And then the other half of the scores of the final score attributed to a proposal is calculated on the basis of its impact and on the quality of its implementation. So when it comes to the impact, we look at not only the scientific, economic, and societal outcomes of the project, but also at the enhancement of the career perspectives, as well as the employability of the researchers involved. So once again, this is a very important component of projects, the training and the ability of the host organizations really to put the researchers in a position where their career can benefit from the grant they receive. And then when it comes to the quality and efficiency of the implementation, well, there we look at the structure of the work plan on one hand, and also on the capacity and resources of the host organizations to make sure that they are up to the task, basically. So we evaluate that too. So you know that the new call is coming up and it will close in September. So this means that this year the results of the evaluation might be available towards the end of the year, with projects starting in the first quarter, more or less, of next year, or in the first half, depending also on the needs of the host organizations. But the application process is done entirely online. So there is a website called the Funding and Tender Opportunities Portal, where basically the applicants can find the call, can find all the tools to prepare their application. Nothing is done on paper anymore since a few years. And the application is composed of two parts. There is an administrative part, the so-called Part A, which is almost entirely filled in by the system itself, depending on which organization applies, the duration of the project, and then consequently its budget, and so on. And then there is a narrative part, which is in the end the most important one. It can be up to 10 pages long. So it needs to be uploaded in the system as a separate document. And there, basically, the applicant needs to describe the research project that has been put forward. So in order to prepare for the development of an application like this, it's good to familiarize with all the relevant documents that can support applicants in this exercise. And the most important ones are, of course, the work program, where you can see the characteristics of the call, what the program wants to fund, the opening and closing date of the call, the budget, if there is any specific set of instruction for a certain year, which can happen. But then on top of that, also, it's very important to familiarize with the guide for applicants. And the guide for applicants is a manual, basically, that explains step by step how a proposal is put together, how to fill in the templates, what should be emphasized, where the attention should be put in order to maximize the chances of being selected for funding. So this is really a very, very important document. Now, before evaluating proposals, when we receive them, we first check their admissibility and then eligibility. So we don't jump immediately into a sort of full-scale evaluation of the proposal. So first we check if the proposal are admissible, and to be admissible, proposals should demonstrate that the researcher and the supervisor are two different people, of course, that there is one proposal per researcher submitted in the call, because otherwise we will have to discard the first ones and keep only the last one submitted. And then we check if the letters of commitment have been included in the application. So as you remember from before, if there is a placement in the non-academic sector at the end of the project, we need a letter of commitment from the organization that will host the researcher in this placement. And we also need letters of commitment of associated partners. So if a fellow is sent to a secondment during the implementation of the project to another organization, well, this other organization is considered usually a partner of the consortium and needs to provide a letter of commitment confirming that they are ready to host the researcher and indicating for which kind of activities they will host the fellow. Then we check the eligibility of the proposals. And so basically we look at the main rules of the program if we check that they are respected. So when it comes to the European postdoctoral fellowships, we check that the duration is between 12 and 24 months, and that, of course, the researchers to be hired will respect the eligibility criteria. So the mobility rule, as we've seen, and also the fact that they should have received their PhD maximum 8 years before the recruitment. And then we check where the host organization is based, because host organizations should always be based in member states or Horizon Europe associated countries, because these are the countries that we are sort of authorized to pay if their organizations submit a proposal that is successful and is selected for funding. When it comes to the global postdoctoral fellowships, so where the research is taking place outside the European Union, we check, of course, again, that the duration is the correct one. So in this case, a bit longer, 24 to 36 months, with a minimum of 12 months return phase in European member states or associated countries. And then we check that the associated partner where the fellow will be sent is indeed based in a third country and not in the European Union or in one of the associated countries. So in this case, the eligibility condition for the participants are different. So the host organization, meaning again the organization that applies for funding, needs to be in the European Union or in one of the associated countries, but then the host organization outside where the fellow will be sent needs to be in a third country. When it comes to the ERA postdoctoral fellowships, as I mentioned in the beginning, they used to be a separate tool, a separate funding scheme. Now they are completely integrated in the postdoctoral fellowships. The rules are the same for the European postdoctoral fellowships, with one exception, meaning the host organization needs to be based in a so-called widening country. So basically, the widening countries are countries that, in principle, receive a bit less of the Marie Curie funding, of the total Marie Curie funding. And so we kind of give them a bit of an advantage by dedicating the budget of the ERA postdoctoral fellowships to them, so that we hope they will receive more funding and will be able to recruit more fellows than in the past. So this list of widening countries changes from time to time. So it needs to be consulted before making any application. It's available in the documentation of the call for which you or your host organization will decide to apply. And so when submitting a proposal for an ERA postdoctoral fellowship, so for a widening country, there is a specific question to answer in part A, so the administrative part of the proposal, in order to confirm that the intention of the host organization is to participate in the ERA postdoctoral fellowship and consequently have access to this extra budget and increase its chances of success. Obviously, everybody says yes when they come from a widening country, which makes sense, but it's something to keep in mind because it would be a pity to forget to specify this thing in the proposal. And then finally, from the launch of the new program, also research covered by Euratom is possible. There are restrictions, however, in terms of where this can take place, because when it comes to nuclear research, basically only European member states are eligible, or Euratom associated countries, so Switzerland, the UK, and Ukraine. So the host organization can only be based in these countries, so there is a much more limited geographical coverage in comparison to the other parts of the postdoctoral fellowship program. And the same restriction applies to the nationality of the researchers. So they need to be nationals or long-term residents of European member states or in Euratom associated countries. So again, Switzerland, UK, and Ukraine. So this is a new possibility. It's a little bit less flexible than the others, but it was included in the new program to widen even further what can receive support, what kind of research can be done without sort of making the rules more complicated, and because every strand, every component of that I've shown you of the postdoctoral fellowships, so the European, the global postdoctoral fellowships, the ERA fellowships, and also the Euratom funding, they're basically included in the same call. So it's very simple in a way to apply because there's only one access point to this funding tool. And clearly, like in other Marie Curie programs, there is no limitation in terms of what kind of sectors can benefit from this funding. So the logic is completely bottom up. We don't sort of put any priority. The projects are evaluated only on the basis of their excellence. So any sector can be covered, from engineer to chemistry to humanities to physics and so on. So the application is very free. Voila. So this is all I wanted to tell you, to present you this instrument. I hope this was clear and interesting. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and of course I'm open to any question you might have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you a lot, Filippo, for your nice presentation. And yeah, is there any question?
While you're thinking about it, I just want to give you, I'm going to put it in the chat. So I hope it works, the link. Because I looked at the page in the funding portal where the next call will be published. So that's where you can find all the information. Again, on the 13th of April, everything will be published there. And also, I'm going to give you in the chat my email address. Should you have at any point in time a question on the program, you can drop me an email. As I said, I'm not personally following this part of the Marie Curie program because I work for the unit that deals with international projects like yours, no, where there are multiple beneficiaries, lots of fellows and PhD students at the same time. But okay, I mean, if you have questions, you can contact me. I can check with my colleagues and I can get back to you. So if I can be helpful, with pleasure.
So thank you very much, Filippo. I actually have 2 questions, which I wanted. So you mentioned for these global projects, these global fellowships, a mandatory return phase to the European Union. Maybe you elaborated a bit on it, but could you maybe add some more information on that? What does it mean?
So basically, it means that so the core activities will take place in a third country if you go for a global postdoctoral fellowship. And so this means outside the European Union or its associated countries. So you will spend your basically 12 to 24 months doing research activity in a third country outside the European Union. And then at the end of this research phase, let's say at the end of your project, there will be a 12 months of sort of mandatory return phase in your host organization, because the host will be based in the European Union or in one of the associated countries, to complete your work within your host organization. So the idea is that you're not going to spend time only in a third country, but at some point, for at least the last 12 months of the project, you will actually work also for your host organization to complete your research project. So that's how they would be structured in this case.
Okay, thanks. And the other thing I was wondering, so you mentioned this, what was it, guide for applicants?
Yep.
I just had a brief look on Google, and I only found the one for 2021.
Right.
Is it likely that the one for 2022 will be vastly different, or is it probably the
No,
same?
because usually the work programs for the calls cover periods of 2 years. So the work program that is out now covers 2021 and 2022. So my expectation is that the guide for applicant will not change. If it changes, it's just to correct something that might have not been very clear, because we get feedbacks from people using it and we try to always make it better. But it won't change in the sense that the rules will be different. So if you find that for the 2022 call that is about to open in the coming weeks, the only guide for applicants is the 2021 version, it's still fine, basically, because it contains all the instructions you need to put together the application.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Super.
Are there other questions? Otherwise, I will go with a question myself. No. Okay, so a question about which kind of applications are usually founded at the end. So this Poema project is mostly about maths. So it's like mostly fundamental research.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is only fundamental research postdoc application competitive against other submissions that may involve more industrial partners or more, say, applied or non-fundamental aspects?
Right. So I would say that if you focus on fundamental research only, it's not necessarily a weakness for a proposal, because in the end, most of the time the organizations applying for funding are universities, so there is a lot of attention given also to fundamental research. We receive a few thousand applications every year, because each project for postdoctoral fellowships is rather small in terms of budget, so we can fund really quite a lot of them. And so there is really a huge variety of activities that receive funding. So focusing on fundamental research, I don't think is a weakness. Having said that, because there is this increased sort of attention towards the non-academic exposure, there is this possibility of having a placement at the end of the project for up to 6 months in the non-academic sector to get more funding. I would say that if you manage to find something that is interesting also for a company, for example, and that can have, if not immediate application, but where applications are envisageable, that would be potentially an advantage, because you can justify better the need for a non-academic placement at the end, and show that the project really tries not only to do excellent research and training, but also to bridge the gap between the academic and non-academic world. And this, I think, is, given the structure of the program, I think it could be an advantage when it will be evaluated.
Okay, thank you a lot for the clarification. And another question about the length of the project. You said in the standard call, let's say between 12 and 24 months.
Yeah.
One has to specify this length that one wants to receive these fundings for at the beginning of the project, or it will be the European Commission deciding how many months you will last?
No, in principle, it's part of the application. So depending on the type of research to be done and the type of activities to be implemented, the applicant defines the duration of the project. I mean, we intervene. So usually what happens is when a project gets selected for funding, before signing the grant agreement that provides the funding, we have a look at the evaluation report of the experts that checked the proposal, right? And if we see that there are some weaknesses or shortcomings that could make the project a little bit better, we inform the applicant, and then they can somehow follow up on them and try to fine-tune the application in order to make it as effective as possible. So I would imagine that there could be a situation where we might say that according to our experts, a longer duration than the one proposed would be better, or a shorter one. But first of all, it would be only a suggestion. And secondly, in the end, yeah, the decision would remain in the hands of the applicant. Like we don't have the really the power to change what has been submitted to us for evaluation. So in a nutshell, no, we don't decide the duration in the end.
Okay, and does this duration proposed by the applicant affect somehow? So it's more likely to be selected if the project lasts for 12 months or 24, or there is no rule?
I would say this has no impact. It depends. In the end, what really matters is the quality of the research and of the training proposed. I would say if that part is good, and if the host organization clearly has all the tools to make it happen and to deliver high quality research and training for the fellows, then I think that's by far the most important thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Perfect. And just out of curiosity, what is the percentage of the selected projects among the few thousand that you receive?
That's a good question. I'm not completely sure when it comes to postdoctoral fellowships. I can tell you that when it comes to the doctoral networks that I deal with, so the multi-beneficiary kind of projects, usually the success rate is between 10 to 12% of all the proposals we received. But then, of course, if you look at the entire sort of amount of proposals we received, there is at least, I would say, roughly speaking, at least a quarter of them that are poor, like that are really not competitive. You see what I mean? So in the end, the competition is not really with everybody. But yeah, what we hope it's going to happen, and for us, these are the first calls, so we don't really know how it will develop. But because we increased the budget in comparison to the past, because the program has been very successful and has, we've seen a lot of demand, we hope that with a higher budget, in the end, the success rate will increase. And what typically happens year after year is that the budget grows. So we begin with the first call of the new program that has the lowest budget. So it's the toughest in a way. And then every year that passes, it goes up. So hopefully in the end, this will really have an impact on the success rate. That's what we're aiming for also.
Okay. Thank you again. And yeah, are there other questions from the other participants? So it seems no. So
Okay.
we thank again Filippo for this very interesting presentation. And I think
Thank you.
we stop here and resume at 3 p.m.
Super. Thank you for the invitation again, and have a nice rest of the workshop, and have a nice weekend.
Anche a te.
All right.
Ciao.
Grazie. Bye-bye.